Well, it's kind of cold right now, but still, it's not bad for November the 2nd. I believe I work tomorrow. I should actually send the people a text to confirm with them, though, which I'll do after I make this video and start uploading it. Um, I want to tell you a story now that was told to me. Uh, Actually, I'll tell you a few stories. These are stories that were told to me by my old friend Tom Kerr. Tom Kerr lived to be 89 years old. Just died a few years ago. And he was born in 1932, so he grew up through the Depression and World War II. He had a lot of good stories to tell anyway. And I'll tell you a few of them now. He grew up in a little village called Stanleyville on a farm near to Stanleyville. Like I say, during the Depression. And there was a cheese factory in Stanleyville. That wasn't unusual. A lot of the little rural villages around here had cheese factories where farmers would bring their milk, they'd sell their milk there. The milk would be turned into cheese and whatnot. Anyway, so of course the cheese factory had a cheese maker. And it's quite the old dead tree. That tree is actually quite huge. If you could see the trunk of it, it's amazing how big it is. Anyway, I've been over there. I've seen it, and it's a huge tree. Quite old, really old. Anyway, Tom, he relayed the story to me anyway. One day, some guys in Stanleyville, they got a hold of some whiskey. You could say they drank from the wrong bottle, though, because the whiskey that they drank, there was something wrong with it. It wasn't good. I don't know if it was wood alcohol or what it was, but it was something that wasn't good anyway. And I guess they went psychotic. They must have. And they decided they were going to go down to the cheese factory and they were going to kill the cheesemaker. Don't ask me why. I don't know. I don't believe they had a personal grudge against him or anything. I don't think they had any issues with the cheesemaker or anything like that. They just decided they were going to kill the cheesemaker. So, anyway, they set off to kill the cheesemaker. But fortunately, somebody was aware of what they were up to, and they got down to the cheese factory, and they warned the cheesemaker, and the cheesemaker ran for his life. And he got away just ahead of the guys. When the guys got to the cheese factory, the cheesemaker was already gone. But only just. He had just managed to escape from that situation where these guys were going to kill him. Anyway, I guess when they sobered up, they forgot about killing them anyway. And the cheesemaker lived out the rest of his life. Relatively incident-free, I guess. Anyway, that's just one story. Oh, yeah. Another story was there was a little store in the village of Stanleyville, a general store. And I guess the lady who ran the store was kind of a miserable going person. If anybody remembers Little House on the Prairie, the show Little House on the Prairie from the 1970s, and there was the little girl on the show, Nellie. And Nellie was kind of mean. And Nellie had, her family had money. And Nellie's parents owned the general store in the town of Walnut Grove. That was the little town where they lived, where they lived, or the closest town to where they lived. They lived in the country, but Walnut Grove was their town anyway, where they would go to buy supplies and whatnot. Anyway, if anybody remembers the mother from that family, I can't think of what her name was now. I remember the little girl's name was Nellie. Nellie was really mean. But the mother was equally mean anyway. Well, apparently, the lady that ran the store at Stanleyville was of that type. She was also a very mean person. And her and her husband had taken in what was called a homeboy. And see, what had happened is, during the war, in the early years of the war, a lot of British people sent their children over to North America, over to Canada in particular, to be looked after by families here, because it wasn't safe over there. You know, the Germans were bombing the shit out of the place, and you know, there was always a threat, an imminent threat of invasion, and it was pretty scary. I mean, you got to bear in mind, nobody back then knew how the war would end. And, you know, it was looking for a while like the Germans were going to win. They were winning at first. And so, you know, people were pretty uneasy in Europe, and especially over in England. And so some of them sent their children over to North America, over to Canada, to stay with families here, where they'd be safe from bombing raids and from the possible invasion that they thought may very well come, and all that. Anyway, this little boy from England was sent to Stanleyville to stay with the owners of the general store. And he wasn't very well treated anyway. Anyway, he and Tom got to be best friends. They really did. They got to be just, you know, I don't know what you'd say, tight as peas in a pod, I guess. They just got to be real friends. And like I say, the lady there treated the little boy terribly, though. And one time, a little boy, his mother had sent him a package with a brand new pair of shoes in it. And, you know, because, you know, sometimes the families, if they were able to, they'd send their children packages, send them a little bit of money or a little care package or something. Anyway, his mother had sent him this package with a beautiful new pair of shoes in it. Pretty big deal back then to have something like that, you know, a pretty special gift from his mom all the way over in England. And you got to bear in mind, too, he didn't know how things were going to turn out. He might never have seen his mother again. Who's to say she wouldn't have been killed in the war or killed in an invasion? I mean, or something. Who knows what might have happened to her? There's an airplane flying over there. Who knows what might have happened to her? Anyway, you know, nothing was certain. Hey, everything was up in the air. There was a war, so everything was unstable and uncertain, and pretty frightening times all the way around. Anyway, she sent him this beautiful pair of shoes. And what did the lady who owned the store do? But she took his shoes away from him, and she hung them up on the wall in the store for sale. You know, she sold his shoes that his mom had sent him. And I remember Tom telling me that story anyway, you know. But I forget what he did now, though. He got her back. I can't remember what he did, but he played some kind of prank on her. And he got her back. I just can't remember what it was now, but it was pretty good. Whatever it was, it resulted in her learning a bit of a lesson anyway, you know. Anyway, that was another story, though. That's an odd-looking trail, eh? It's not like a chemtrail, though, because it's short, but it's just a different color. Anyway, a funny thing is, I was over to visit Tom a few years before he passed away. And this fella, who he hadn't seen since the 1940s, because after the war, of course, he went back to England, where he came from. And Tom hadn't seen him since the 1940s. And that guy, he came back to Canada for a visit. And I was there when he came to see Tom. I was there for the reunion. And it was very touching, you know. It really was. It was kind of a beautiful thing. But yeah, that's a story anyway, too. That's another story that Tom had told me. That is a little different. Anyway, another story that he told me one time is about a little boy that lived around there too, and his mother had given him some money to go to the store, and he was supposed to bring back it was something for supper. She needed something for the evening meal, and so she gave the little boy this money to take down to the store in Stanleyville to buy whatever it was anyway that she needed for the evening meal. I can't remember what it was now. He had told me, but I can't remember. Anyway, the little boy, instead of buying the stuff that his mother told him to buy, he bought some nails, for knocking things together, some wood nails. And he brought them home, and he was building himself a cart, like a soapbox derby type of a cart, like a little car. And I guess he had some wheels and an axle and different parts that he had gathered together. And he had all the wood, but he needed the nails to put the body of the thing together. So his mother came out, and here he is out in the yard building this thing. And she came outside, and she says, what happened? Now, she said, where is that stuff I told you to get for supper? And the little guy, he says, he said, I didn't get that. I got these nails instead. And the mother was furious. He knocked most of them into this thing. He'd pretty much had the thing built by the time she came out to check on him and ask him where the thing was that she had sent him to the store for. It was some little boy that went to school with Tom, I guess, at the Stanleyville school, and that's how Tom knew the story. Anyway, the mother was not impressed. And she told him, she said, you got to return all those nails and get the thing that I told you to get. Don't be doing things like that. You can't just take money and do that. You got to return those nails. Well, she made that little guy take all the nails out of that thing and straighten them and return them, because of course taking them out would bend them. And she made him straighten them all and return them anyway and bring back the thing that she wanted. So yeah. I don't blame her. He had no business doing that. It'd be a good lesson for the little guy. And money was tight in those days too. People didn't have money to throw around. We're going back to those days now, by the way, in case you wondered. If you haven't already figured it out. I'm sure you have, though. We are going back to that now. In fact, I'd say we're already there in many ways. Anyway, that was just another story that Tom had told me about the goings-on in Stanleyville. He told me when he and his wife Helen bought their house in 1956, when they were first married. They were married about a year, and they had rented a house, and then they bought a house. That's the house that Tom lived in for the rest of his life, him and his wife. His wife died before he did, though. He outlived his wife by about 10 years, I guess. 10 or maybe more than that, maybe 15 or 20 years. Might be more like that, really. I can't remember now, but he outlived her by quite a bit anyway. But in those days, the banks really didn't lend money to people for mortgages, They didn't deal with private individuals like they do now. And if you had to get a mortgage, you had to borrow private funds. So there were people that had money, and they'd lend you money, and you could take a mortgage out, and they'd lend you the money, and if you didn't make your payments, then they could take the house. So they had the house as collateral if you didn't keep up the payments. Anyway, they borrowed the funds from an old man who was deaf. And the day that they made the contract, they're sitting in the lawyer's office, and they had agreed to a certain percentage interest rate. I know it might have been 5% or something like that. I don't know, but they agreed to a certain percentage anyway of interest that they had to pay on this loan to buy that house. And they're sitting in the lawyer's office, And the old deaf man is there, and Tom and his wife Helen are there, and they're doing the paperwork. And then come time to talk about the rate of interest, the lawyer says, okay, so the agreed upon rate of interest is, and he said the number that they had agreed upon. And when he said that, the old man took his hand like that, and he went like that twice, bumped the interest rate up 2% on them, you know. And what could they do, you know? I mean, they had agreed to buy the house, everything was in place. The old bugger waited to the last minute and then went back on his word and bumped the interest rate up by 2%. That's just another story anyway. And the house that they bought, it had been a rental property prior to them buying it, and the landlord had sold it. So, of course, the tenant had to get out because Tom and Helen weren't interested in renting it to him. They wanted to live there, you know. So the tenant had to leave. And the tenant was not happy about having to leave anyway. And so when they took possession of the house, the way this house is laid out, there's the front door, the front of the house, and then there's a hallway, and there's like a living room sitting area. To your there's a set of stairs go upstairs. To your right, to your left, there's like a little an archway with a living room sitting area, and then you go through that, and you go into another room which was the dining room, and then beyond that was the kitchen at the back of the house. Well, of course, they open the door, they got the keys, they open the door, they go in. Helen, she goes straight through to the back of the house to the kitchen. Tom is still standing in the doorway. And she comes to the kitchen, she comes to a dead stop. And she turns around. She got this look on her face, I guess, like she doesn't know what to think. And she turns around and she says to Tom, "There's no floor in here." And Tom says, "Well, what? No floor?" He said, "What do you mean there's no floor in there?" And she says, "There's no floor, like I can see the ground. When I look down, I can see the ground. There's no floor." See, the kitchen was built out at the back of the house, and it was just built over the ground, eh? Turns out that the tenant, he was so angry about having to leave that he had stolen the floor out of the house. You know, it's another story anyway. So they had to put a new floor in the kitchen. He'd stolen the floor out of the kitchen. He had, because he was so mad about having to leave that house. Anyway, that's just another story anyway. Yeah. Tommy had a bad drinking problem. He drank very heavily for a good portion of his life. He only quit when he was in his 40s in 1978. He was around 45 years old when he quit drinking. But he was telling me a story one time. There was a fella in Perth by the name of Harold Munn, and Harold Munn owned a taxi cab company. And anyway, in the early 70s, Harold Munn actually passed away in 1972. But he, before he passed away, he sold off all his assets. And a friend of Tom's bought one of Harold's old taxi cabs. This fella, he bought a 1962 Pontiac that was one of Harold's taxi cabs. Of course, I talk about 1962 Pontiacs sometimes because my dad had one back in the early 70s that I have really good memories of. And I owned one myself at one time when I grew up. I owned a 62 Pontiac Parisienne for a while. Anyway, Tom, his friend, one of his drinking buddies, had bought this 1962 Pontiac Parisienne taxi cab off of Harold Munn. And they got themselves a case of beer, a case of 24 bottles of beer. And they were going to go out, Tom and this fella that had bought this car, and they were going to go out onto some backcountry road somewhere and sit and drink this beer. You know, they were both alcoholics, eh? They're going to drink the beer in the car, park somewhere and drink the beer. Well, get drunk. Well, they got out there. They put the case of beer in the trunk of the car, and they head out into the country where they were going. They get out there and they open up the trunk and the case of beer is gone. It had disappeared out of the trunk. But there was a big hole in the trunk floor where the case of beer had been. The trunk of that car was so badly rusted out that the case of beer had just fallen down through onto the road at some point. They never did find it. I guess they retraced their steps, but they never did find it. And they figured the bottles would be all smashed to hell anyway. It wouldn't be much point trying to save anything, but still, I guess they did go back and look for it just in case. But they never did find it anyway. But yeah, another funny story anyway. Well, I think that's it for funny stories for now. I'll tell you a few more another day. I'm going to go inside and finish washing my dishes. I got more hot water here. Oh, it's cold and damp. The dampness makes it feel even colder than it really is, you know. Now, wait a minute. Before I do this, there's nothing in here. But there really isn't any point to me putting this water. I might just as well not bother. Okay. Yeah. Might just as well not bother. Okay. There we go. I'll put the big rock back on the garbage can. I will. Yes, I will. There it is right there. Oh, this is always a bugger to pick up. I'm getting another one of those headaches too, so that's fun. I love the colors at this time of night. Here we go now. Let's see. Oh my goodness. God damn. Okay. There we have it. That always takes a lot out of me. All right. Fold up my chair here. I will. Anyway, that's it. That was just a few stories from my old friend Tom Kerr. He was quite kind to me. When I got out of the hospital in 1976, after I'd been used as a guinea pig for drugs, and I was in really bad shape from having that done to me. And Tom, he saw how the other boys were gang up on me, and they beat the hell out of me out on the schoolyard every day. In those days, if you were a boy, you had to fight your way for the schoolyard. Didn't matter if you wanted to. It was just how it was. You had to. And that's how the pecking order got established. That's the way we were. We were kind of like a pack of wild dogs, really, the way we did things. Anyway, prior to that, I was a pretty good little fighter. I didn't like to fight, and I wouldn't pick a fight with anybody. But if somebody challenged me, I also wouldn't back down. And I won a lot of fights. I wouldn't say I won them all. I got my ass kicked plenty, but I won the majority. If I got into 10 fights, I'd win 7 of them anyway. You know, the other 3 of them are get my rear end handed to me, big time. But still, on average, I was a pretty good fighter. I won more often than I lost. But when I came out of that hospital, I was weak as a kitten. And the other lads that I had defeated, they decided to even the score anyway and to reset the pecking order. And so I got beaten up pretty badly anyway every day, you know. And Tom, he took me under his wing. Tom was the custodian at our school, and he was also a cousin of mine. My grandmother was a Kerr. Her maiden name was Kerr. And my grandmother, my dad's mother, who actually also grew up in Stanleyville, in the village of Stanleyville, my grandma's mother, my grandma, my dad's mother, Mary. Mary was the daughter of Fonzie Kerr. And Fonzie Kerr was the brother of Frank Kerr. And Frank Kerr was Tom Kerr's father. So that would make Tom a cousin of mine. I don't know, maybe a second or third cousin, something like that. I think a second cousin. He'd be a cousin, I guess, to my dad, or I don't know. I'm not real good with stuff like that, but he'd be a cousin of some sort anyway. But he took me under his wing, and he had me stay inside with him at recess time and at lunchtime and help him with his chores in the school, rather than to go out into the schoolyard to get my clock cleaned every day. And he'd take me on the weekends out to his woodlot, and I'd help him pile wood and stuff, help him do his chores out there, and he'd pay me, give me a couple of dollars for the day's work, and I'd have my breakfast at his house before we left early in the morning, and I'd have my lunch out there with him. I remember I drank a lot of coffee out there because I wanted to act like I was big. You know, I was 8, 9, 10 years old in those years, you know, and I wanted to act like I was a man and drink coffee like a man would drink coffee. And so I drink the coffee, and I remember I made myself sick to my stomach more than once doing that, you know. But Tom always brought a great big thermos full of hot coffee out there with him. Anyway, and I drink that and made myself wicked sick more than once. But yeah, I remember that anyway, going out there with him, and yeah, used to drive his old car up around the fields there and on the back roads up through there and everything, an old 1964 Chev that he had and stuff. Yeah, long time ago anyway. Yeah, anyway, like I say, he was pretty good to me when I was growing up. Then when I was a young man, when I needed advice, oftentimes I'd go to him, or if I needed to borrow money, I'd go to him, or if I didn't have a car and I needed to use a car, I'd borrow his car. And he helped me out in a lot of different ways. And then in his old age, he became crippled. His legs quit working, and he couldn't walk anymore, at least not very far. He could get up out of his chair and walk a short distance, but his legs were just throbbing all the time, and they weren't working right, and he had a bad time of it in his later years. The last 10 years of his life, really, he went through hell. But when he deteriorated like that, I started going over and shoveling the snow and making sure his garbage got out, and I'd cook him a meal. And of course, he was very particular because his wife was a really good cook. And I remember he used to get mad at me. He'd want bacon and eggs all the time. That was his big thing. He wanted bacon and eggs. And he'd always get mad at me. He'd say, "God damn it, do you not know how to fry a strip of bacon?" He'd say, "What the hell's wrong with you, you stupid arse?" He'd call you a stupid arse, you know, that was the saying. He was a bit like groundskeeper Willie from The Simpsons, Tom was, you know. He had that way about him. Anyway, I remember that. He'd get kind of mad at me because I didn't cook the bacon the way Helen cooked it. And I used to tell him, I used to say, nobody's going to cook the bacon the way Helen cooked it, Tom. You know. But anyway. But yeah, I remember all that anyway. But it was my chance to kind of pay him back a little bit for everything he did for me. You know. But he was very proud, and he was resistant to the help at first, and he did everything he could to drive me away. And he damn near succeeded more than once because he was an awful cantankerous person. Very stubborn, you know. And I remember we had some pretty good fights when I first started trying to help him. And eventually he gave in and allowed me to help him. And anyway, I'm glad I was able to do that for him. Anyway, we'll talk later.